with Dayo.
Welcome back. I still have Factor 90.3 Nigeria info and here in Port Harcourt. I'm Dayo. It's 10 minutes gone past 4 p.m. Conversation continues. Thanks for staying tuned. I gather it might still be raining out there, possibly where you are. So do take some extra precaution on the roads. The roads are slippery, no doubt about that, because of the rains. Also, just because it rains doesn't mean traffic rules and regulations are suspended. Especially for our commercial transporters. No wow this time. Let's put some sense into it to ensure everybody gets to their destination in as good a time as possible and safely as well. But we get back to the conversation at this time. So I mentioned earlier at the start of the show today that I came across some reports by SDN, Stakeholder Democracy Network. It's been a while actually, about a week or two now since I came across this report. But thankfully, we can have a conversation on it today. Said report, by the way, is titled "The Status of Civic Space in Rivers State," and I thought it was an interesting report, and I read the summary. Once again, thankfully, we can discuss it in some detail at this time. So, what's a civic space, and what's the status in Rivers State, and how important? What does that mean? What's the implication for you, for me, for everybody here in Rivers State? And what do we or can we do about it if the situation is one that needs some redressing? Well, joining me in the studio at this time for this conversation is Flora Asieri. Flora Asieri is a Senior Program Officer Governance with Stakeholder Democracy Network. Flora, good evening to you. Welcome to Hard Facts.
Hi, Dayo. Hello, everyone.
All right, great. Let's start with SDN. SDN is pretty popular around these parts, has been for some time. But for the benefit of those who will not know what you guys do over there, what's SDN really?
Oh, okay. So Stakeholder Democracy Network is an NGO. We've been in the Niger Delta for over 15 years now, and we actually work with, people who are, affected by the extractive industries. So what we mean by that is people who have been neglected over a long period of time, and then people who are also affected by weak governance. So what we do is try to build their capacity, ensure that, they have a right, they have a voice, and they also have, the particular bits that they can put together, to push for, a transparent governance.
All right, so let's consider those two areas. People who are affected by the activities of the extractive industry,
yes,
and then weak governance. Now, extractive industry, is it just places where, or locales where mining activities go on? Because one way or another, every Nigerian is affected by the extractive industry. So can you clarify that?
Yeah, some are host communities, but of course some also, have facilities that pass through their communities. So they also are part of,
All right, so
our target.
Now, those affected by weak governance, that's every Nigerian.
Every Nigerian is affected. Yeah.
So STN is everywhere in Nigeria?
Our focus is in Niger Delta.
Okay.
Yeah, that's like our niche.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. So since we all come to terms with what STN is about, let's get into this report now. The status of civic space in Rivers State. Let's start with civic space. What do you mean by civic space?
In layman's term, I think civic space is, like a set of rules that can gauge how open a society is. So how are you able to, exercise your rights to freedom, your right to protest and all of that bit? Is it open? That's where you can then rate the civic space. Yeah.
All right. How sensible or reasonable society is.
Yeah.
If I have an issue with somebody, how can we resolve it? What
how
systems
can you
are in
resolve
place?
it? Exactly.
Yes. If I feel my rights have been violated, for example, how can I ensure that those rights are upheld?
Yes, through dialogue, by the way.
Of course.
Yeah.
Through relevant established agencies and departments of government.
Exactly.
Okay, so what informed SDN conducting research on, because I imagine some research must have gone into this before that report was published.
Definitely.
So what informed the need to do that research and produce this report?
Okay, we all know in Nigeria, the issue of SARS, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, all over Nigeria, and the fact that, they've been very, very unruly, over these years. And, the reason of attack over time in Rivers State, also generated to the other reports that were gotten from different parts of the country. And then this, got youth to come together and then come out en masse and say, okay, enough is enough. We want the end of SARS in Nigeria. So the SARS protest, actually paved the way for us to do this report, this in-depth report in the Niger Delta with a focus of Rivers State.
All right, but why the focus on Rivers State? Because you talk about the, so let me get this right. The End SARS protest was what inspired this report.
The End SARS protest, yes, and then, the issues of human rights violation, that the COVID-19, pandemic brought about, yes. Okay. That, influenced this report.
Okay, so but why the focus on Rivers State?
Because this is Rivers. Rivers State has been known, to experience, very unruly behavior from, security agencies that are supposed to be protecting lives and property. And we felt there are a lot of cases that have been highlighted over time, and we felt, yes, it is indeed an opportunity to give Rivers State a voice, just to add to the national level, which was even cited during the national protests.
So what amount of work went into producing this report, and what kind of information or data did they still have to rely on to be able to produce this?
Okay, so for us, what we did, our methodology was to conduct surveys. We conducted key informant interviews, KIIs. We also conducted focus group discussions, and our participants cut across, different sectors. So we had, the academia represented. We had faith group organizations. We had faith-based organizations. We had civil society NGOs. We had journalists represented. Media outlets. So all of this informed, a very robust discussion about civic space in Rivers State, the effects, the causes, and all of that bits that put together our report.
Pardon me, but I didn't get that you also had those from the side of government or government agencies, security, for example, maybe the judiciary. You didn't mention a representative.
Lawyers were represented.
Okay.
Yeah, lawyers were represented.
How about the police, for example?
We, of course, sent out invites, but, it depends on who responds to your request. Yeah.
Okay. So what did this research and your report, what did it reveal about the status of the civic space in Rivers State?
Okay, so for...
I'm almost afraid to ask that question, but I have to.
No, but again, if you look at it, nationally, it is repressed, like obstructed at all points. But in Rivers State, it's a bit closed, yeah, but, there are actually opportunities to open up the civic space. So from our discussions with the different participants, we noticed that Rivers State is better when you compare it to the national level. Yeah. All
right. So when you say it's closed, can you break that down? What did this report reveal?
For us, normally, if you look at Civicus 2, what they did was it's either civic space is open or closed. But we made use of the Oxfam civic space monitoring tool. Now that tool allows for you to be multidimensional in the sense that civic space cannot be open or closed. There are actually leeways. There are actually ways where you can actually improve on it. So we made use of this particular tool, and it had about 9 different dimensions. And based on the dimensions, we graded it with our participants. And generally, civic space is repressed in Rivers State, and it is actually on a downturn, to being closed. But there are areas where we're actually, there are opportunities for us to expand the civic space in Rivers State.
We'll come to those opportunities in a moment.
Okay.
But when you say it's repressed and it's getting to the point of being closed, how do we identify this specifically? What are those things, those pointers that help us identify that it is being repressed in the state?
Okay, so we look at regulatory framework where we have issues relating to the social media bill, the NGO bill, all of those things are expected to close the civic space because, for example, civil society actors don't have a voice because these are actually policies that are being put in place to ensure that it is, just shrink the civic space so that people do not have a voice to, tend to, come out with some of their recommendations and all of that bit. And then if you look at the access to funding, we've noticed over time that civil society organizations, they have very limited access to funding. You know, because we want to be objective, we don't necessarily seek funding from, you know, government agencies or oil companies or, you know, other agencies that would influence our decisions. So generally with the COVID pandemic and all, funding has been very, 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 you know, hectic to get. So that's one other dimension that is actually shrinking the civic space. And then if we look at freedom of assembly, association, and dissent, now we all know in Rivers State what happened during the COVID-19 lockdown. You know, people were not allowed to protest. You know, there were different memos that was raised by the Rivers State government about citizens not coming out to protest. But, you know, a group of civil society actors led by the Rivers State Civil Society Coalition, you know, said no, they upturned it and said it is actually our constitutional right as citizens to come out en masse to, you know, protest for something we really believe in. And even though the EndSARS protest, you know, initially the government said no protest, you know, is allowed in the state. But the next day, people came out in their numbers. Citizens of Rivers State turned up for that protest. We were also a part of that protest, you know, just to witness how it all went. And we saw the vigor, we saw that passion, we saw the drive from citizens, from CSOs, you know, from activists coming out, because this issue of, you know, SARS police brutality is something that has taken lives. It's something that has affected families. And it was something that we thought we need our voices, you know, to stand against it. And at the end, we marched to the government house and had the governor who addressed us. You understand? So in a way, we're trying to say, if we are quiet, then nothing happens. So the onus falls on us, it lies on us to come out en masse and push for what we believe in.
Besides the EndSARS situation, most unfortunate black period in the country, and other incidents related in and around the COVID-19 era, which, by the way, is still with us. We still got COVID-19. But besides those particular incidents, are there other? Is it a trend in Rivers State to stop people from exercising this right to protest and express their maybe disenchantment with government at whatever level? Have we observed a trend with that?
Yes, it actually is a trend. Whenever you talk about protest, when a memo goes out like, okay, we are coming out en masse to protest, be it maybe pensions, funds or something, you'd see the outrage. You'd see covers by the security agencies, you know, they'll come out en masse, you know, just to probably intimidate, you know, citizens. We've seen it over time. Even during the COVID lockdown, we've seen situations where hotels were brought down, you know, just like that. People's livelihoods were lost. So there have been instances where some of our rights, you know, were infringed on. How
does this shrink the civic space, considering as well that government would have a ready excuse or explanation as to why this happens? So you mentioned security agencies, for example. I mean, during whenever announcements are made or information has been circulated that some protest or the other is going to hold, for example, maybe pensioners not being paid, or other workers of government not being paid, or whatever else it is. And then you see intelligence reports, you know, either designed or received by security operatives or agencies, and they claim that they found credible intelligence to suggest that there are individuals, criminal-minded persons who might take over the protest, and they might get out of hand and basically might pose a threat or security risk to society. And government also might have some other reasons to say maybe, you know, political opponents who are simply trying to whip up sentiment against government. Might there's no be credible reasons as to why government and agencies of government have pushed back against these things, and how exactly is all of this shrinking the civic space?
Truth of the matter is, it is our constitutional rights, you know, freedom of assembly. If we feel there's a cause we need to fight for, then definitely we should be given that, you know, opportunity to vent. And mind you, as civil society actors, we don't go out of the way, you know, to upturn the law. And so the right process is followed, due process is followed. Definitely before we come out en masse, we write letters to the security agencies, because we know that at some point the protest, might be overtaken by, like you mentioned, miscreants. So we need the security agencies to be there by our side to ensure that everything goes on in a safe and orderly manner. So all of that bit is, blocked out, normal. Yeah. So we know what, the states would say if anything goes, contrary to what our protest, ensures. And so because we don't want chaos, to be all over the place, we ensure that we follow due process, write to the police, ensure that they come out to their number, secure us, provide that security, and ensure that everything goes on in a peaceful manner. So we know that bit.
All right, so government, always frowning against protest and all of that. How is it precisely shrinking the civic space?
There have been, cases where very pertinent issues, where government feels they've been erring or they don't want to come out plain, that they try to, pose, certain roadblocks. Now, mind you, during that NSAS protest, that same day, there was another protest, that was supporting SARS that same day in Port Harcourt. But as civil society actors, as activists, as citizens trying to find our voice, air our views, we just did ours peacefully and allowed them to do theirs peacefully. So it's all about give and take. We believe that dialogue is the best way, to solve some of our governance issues and not through violence.
What are some of the other pointers to this shrinking civic space in River State?
Yes, something that I really need to come out clearly with is access to justice and the legal service. That is on the downturn, not just in River State but across. So you find a lot of times that citizens who are probably arrested, they don't have legal representation. They are shut out from legal representation. They are shut out from family. They are shut out from friends. So they are just there, harbored illegally over a long period of time. And we have, an evidence. So during the NSAS protests, after, the whole saga, people were arrested off the street by the police, by the security agencies, and we arrested. And when we got to find out, we decided to pursue the matter because as civil society actors, we stand as the middleman. We need to ensure that, rights are upheld. And we followed this matter through, civil society organizations came together as a coalition. We also had, legal representation. We had the expertise of lawyers, the NBA in Port Harcourt, who gave the necessary support. And at the end of the day, we had 9 of about 11 protesters who were released in River State. And they stayed, illegally detained in the Port Harcourt Correctional Center for over 3 months. The protest happened, at the tail end of 2020. They stayed all through the holidays up until February, but we were able to grant about 9 freedom.
And when you say that justice, access to justice, security operators or agencies play a key role to this in this, don't they?
They do, exactly, they do. Now our point is when people are arrested, it is the responsibility of the security agency to ensure that they have fair hearing. So, for example, you give them access to legal services. So, for example, there is no way that you should be questioning a suspect without the presence of a lawyer.
Are there any other major pointers to this before we go on the break now? Any major pointers to this shrinking civic space?
Yes. Safety and well-being of people. And my point is for journalists. Journalists have been targets in River State. They faced, hell in River State because they try as much as possible to be the voice of the people.
It is Hot Fact 91.3 Nigeria Info here in Port Harcourt. I've got Flora Asieri in studio. She's Senior Program Officer, Governance with SDN. We're discussing a report published by SDN on the status of civic space in River State. To go for a quick break now. We'll return in a moment. Discussions will continue and we'll take your contributions, comments, questions when we return. Please stay tuned.
Keeping up with political issues and developments around you only on Nigeria Info.
And now, Hard Facts. Hard Facts with Dio.
Welcome back. I still had Frank to 90.3 Nigeria Info in Port Harcourt and Dio. 24 minutes ago before 5 o'clock. The news update is at 5. Before then, Flora Asieri of SDN still with me in the studio. We're discussing the status of Civic space in Rivers State. A report released by SDN. Flora, you're welcome once again.
Thank you very much.
What's the impact of a shrinking or a closed civic space? How does that impact on the population, on the people, on that society?
People don't have a voice. Basically, they don't have a voice because when the civic space is closed, they feel their rights are not represented. You know, there's that huge gap between, you know, the governed, you know, and of course those who govern them. And that lack of trust, you know, is evident. It becomes really eminent, you know. The fact that the government cannot provide for you, the government cannot protect you, and you have to do everything yourself. So people feel nonchalant, and then they feel fear. When I say fear, people are afraid to speak up. You see somebody being brutalized in front of you, but because you are scared that if you try to intervene, you also become a victim. You go your way. You look the other way. This has turned out, you know, in different instances in Port Harcourt. You see people videoing from afar, recordings of, you know, police brutality or other forms of, you know, human rights abuse without interfering. Why? Because there's this fear that if I talk, it will happen to me or they will join me put. That's basically the bottom line. So people are scared of speaking out and they don't trust the government. And then there's this apathy, like they don't want to have anything to do with government. They're just about their survival. And that doesn't speak well for the civic space. Because if you don't come out, if you don't tell, remember, we put these people in power. So they serve us. That is a fact that citizens fail to realize. You are actually, you know, these people that you put out there, they are supposed to serve you, not the other way around. So you tell them what to do. But because over these years you have had your human rights, you know, abused and all of that, you become so scared, you become timid, you don't want to speak out, even in the face of, you know, inhumanity. So that's what happens to the civic space.
Does anybody benefit from this, from a shrinking civic space?
Oh, well, I guess for those who, you know, who have the authority to exhibit their brutal, you know, or brutish, you know, attributes, I think they benefit. You know, the fact that, you know, impunity comes to bear. They know that, oh, I can do anything and I get away with it. Nobody would say anything. You know, so they become emboldened and begin to trample on your rights, and people are pushed to the wall. And, you know, they become so scared, so helpless. So, yes, there are people who are benefiting from this system.
All right. Now, this report by SDN also makes certain recommendations. Can we get to that now? What are these recommendations?
Yeah, so we have recommendations to the different bodies. So, for security agencies, our recommendation to them is they should become more open. You know, people tend to see civil society actors or activists as, you know, antagonists. No, we are not antagonizing you. We just want to make things better because we understand the plight of the common man. We just want to, we are like the middleman. We want to bridge, you know, that gap. So for us, we want security agencies to begin to see us as partners. So look at us, you know, become very open to us when it comes to town hall meetings, you know, just open up to us. That's our recommendation to security agencies. And then to the judiciary, we want them, you know, to begin to act their part. So, for example, pro bono cases, begin to take up pro bono cases, because if you look at it generally, a lot of people don't have money to, you know, pay for legal representation. So they need that support. So I feel the judiciary should step up, you know, and begin to act their role. Ensure that where they see injustice, you know, they try to, you know, tamper justice, you know, as they would say. And then to the government, there are issues, relating to non-inclusion. So government should look at including women, should look at including youths, should look at including people living with disability in the decision-making process, because you are not, a custodian of all of the knowledge. When you have some of these people, some of this, demographic, working with you, you tend to, become better in terms of governance. Inclusive governance is what we ask for government, to do. And then government should also work with civil society actors and, organizations. We are not, yes, we are checkmating some of your SSs, but we are not just out there to, stamp you with, a bad stamp or something. But we just want to improve the governance process. So you shouldn't see us, as antagonists. We also have a recommendation to civil society actors. So over time, we've noticed that when civil society actors act in silos, you don't get the necessary result. But when we come together as a front, and speak with one voice, the result is thunderous. So our recommendation to civil society actors, irrespective of, your different, thematic areas, come together, hold your voice, and push for change. That's our recommendation.
You're welcome to join the conversation right now. The lines are officially open. Do call 0817 93 0002 or 0817 93 0003 or 0817 93 0007. We're live on facebook.com/Nigeria Info PH, and the WhatsApp is on 0809 030 6416. For these, Flora, for these state actors, government, security agents, is there any benefit to them if the civic space is opened up? Because if it's closed and repressive, like you identified a while ago, they may benefit from it, impunity and all of that. You can dispossess someone or something that belongs to them, knowing that nothing is going to happen. But if the reverse were the case and the civic space were open, well, maybe the benefit to citizens is a bit obvious. But to these state actors, do they stand to benefit anything as well?
Definitely. Like proverb would say, a good name is better than riches. So imagine where people are very, very open, people are more trusting, in the system, and they come to you for help, for aid or anything. It shows that you're doing something good. So the fact that your image is portrayed, in a positive light is a huge benefit to you, both as a government, both as a security agency, as the judiciary. So the fact that people can, talk about you in reverence and say, oh, this person has done this good deed, that is a huge benefit, if I may say.
Well, I think we've got a caller standing by right now. Let's see, just a moment. We've got the Precious from Roma Logan. Precious, you're welcome. Please go on.
Sorry, thank you so much. I just want to ask your visitor in the house a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you think you are succeeding in your goals concerning the rivers people, especially? I want to be specific now. Looking at, because you mentioned pensioners. Since this current government came to power, they have not been paid. Have this you are succeeding in your goals, on your dreams, in helping rivers people? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Precious, for your question. Now, what I'd like to respond to is this. Remember that civil society actors, we are part of the society, and we also need the support, and assistance of the general citizens, to push for a cause. So, for example, when, very key issues are discussed, it is important for citizens who are affected to also lend support, because if it is just only civil society actors that are talking, it will seem like we have an agenda. But when we have citizens who are also speaking out and also coming out, so for example, if we call for a protest, or if we call for a dialogue or a negotiation or something, and citizens turn up in their numbers, that shows that they are for us. And then that way we can be able to merge our support and then push for our cause. Remember, there is unity, in numbers, as opposed to working in silos. So I feel that if more citizens begin to show concern and support for some of these goals that we champion, then we can make a headway.
Now, I suppose what you're saying also by extension is, as contrary to what many think, that the activities of CSOs is simply just about them. And people say things like, where are the civil society organizations? Where are they? I mean, every Nigerian is supposed to be, quote unquote, an activist.
True.
Because these matters affect you as well.
Exactly.
Whether it's police brutality or any other thing for that matter, you are affected by this, not just members of CSOs.
True.
So you should be able to take part in the conversation. So when you ask civil society organizations like SDN succeeding, the question I think should be, are we as a people succeeding
exactly
in changing the narrative? But Precious, great to hear from you, though. Now, talking about the people themselves, because of the repression, because rights have been abused for so long, because you have people who are even afraid to speak up against government.
True.
There was an incident recently of some Julius Berger workers who were sacked and over making certain demands, and then the River State government declared them wanted.
Yeah.
And I tried to get one of them to do an interview that day. I did announce it. Maybe I shouldn't have, benefit of hindsight now, but I did announce it. The interview was supposed to be in about an hour or two from the start of my show. Next thing, I got an SMS from him saying he couldn't make it. A day or two after, or some days after, I got another SMS. Meanwhile, his number was no longer active. I got another SMS, and he also featured on the news that he'd been abducted. Just as he was making his way to the studio, and a couple of days afterwards, he was released. And he was threatened, told to stay away from the media. I tried to get him to do the interview still, but he declined to do the interview. So that's one example. He's afraid. And he told me over the phone. He said there are people, his loved ones, who have been traumatized by all that's happened so far.
True.
And he's afraid for himself, for his life. He's afraid for his family members as well. So you have people who have been in these situations or other encounters, similar, maybe not so grievous. How are they supposed to respond to these calls? How are they supposed to rise above that fear that if they, for example, intervene in a matter of police brutality, the officers will not shoot them also, or simply drag them into their van and they will disappear as well? How do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, truth be told, it is okay to be afraid because, with the kind of ruthless government...
Before you answer that, sorry, Flora, let's take a call. I think we got Chris on the line from Transamadi. Chris, you're welcome. Go ahead.
Good evening, Dayo.
Go ahead, please.
I want to ask your guests if they do have a national civil society, or is it a state thing? Because the way things are going, the economy down, it's not only when they kill somebody with a gun that will say, government have done something, or the security agents have done. This hunger is another one, and we know the cause of it. Economy, I mean, a situation where nobody can buy.
Chris, I'm suspecting strongly that you've not fully grasped the essence of this conversation. The price of food in the market is not the essence of this conversation. But Chris, great to hear from you, though. So, back to the question I asked, so we'll give an answer. Yeah.
Yes, I said it is actually, it is okay for people to be scared because, the kind of repressive government, that we've had to face over these years, people are actually scared. So, in his right, it is okay to be scared. But that is why I say there is power in unity. You don't have to leave it for one person or two persons, to take up, that challenge. The fact that people are nonchalant about this issue is what makes, governance a problem in the Niger Delta, in Rivers State specifically. Because you just feel, I have what I'm doing, I can afford my meals, and also it's none of my business. Everybody is saying it is none of my business. The fact that you're sitting on the fence and you're not making efforts to join the cause, you are a problem. So if people can conquer that fear and come together, I think we can make a headway. It is okay to be scared, but imagine everybody who are scared coming together and say, okay, you know what, order and I die. let's go on with this. I think something can come out of it.
And how is all of this shrinking civic space affecting CSOs and especially journalists as well?
Oh, for journalists, well, we've had different cases. So, for example, there was a journalist that was arrested with some of his boys because they were covering, a case of, corrupt practice by the Rivers State Task Force at the Maiwon, environs. So, at some point, they caught them, videoing the whole thing, and then, they were harassed, and bundled, with handcuffs and all, like common criminals. But at the end of the day, yes, they got, released and all of that bit. But that also, it shows you that journalists are not safe. We've had a case where a journalist saw a case of, police brutality right in front of him, happening in front of him, and the fact that he wanted to intervene, they beat him up. And then when they found out who he was, this is radio, they don't know you. And when they found out who he was, they were like, oh, so now you would don't find sins. And then he's, they increased the punishment for him. And till this day, his passport, his international passport, has been seized. He cannot travel out of the country. He doesn't have freedom of movement. So you can see what happens to journalists when they speak out. But that's notwithstanding the fact that you have a huge role to play,
And even though, okay, last another call. Right?
Protest or police brutality protest.
Okay, Allah noted. I think his concern is, I'm not sure if Allah has ever taken part or done anything actively to help resolve the matter. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But you hear a lot of complaints from people also who've never lifted a finger, but sort of expressed a genuine concern, nonetheless, that, for example, on radio we have lots of discussions. I've heard similar sentiments being expressed on my shows as well. All of these discussions we're having every time, talking about government, talking about this, talking about that, add that to activities of CSOs like SDN and others, and individuals who are doing what they can, no matter how big or small the scale is. And people wonder if it's having any effect or any impact at all, because even as you identified a while ago, that civic space, in spite of all of these efforts, is shrinking even further.
Yeah. There are actually little wins, little droplets make an ocean. Like I mentioned, we were able to release 9, of the NSAS protesters that were arrested, Then again, it still boils down to citizens. They don't need to just sit and allow CSOs to do the talking, because it will seem like we have an agenda. We have, an objective to discredit the government or to discredit, the security agency, which is not so. So, yes, the results might be, really small compared to what they expect to see. But I just feel if we keep pressing on, we're going to get there eventually. We will get there.
What is the alternative to not pressing on? What is the alternative to that mindset you described a while ago? It's not my problem. After all, I'm surviving. I can take care of myself. I can fend for my family. We're not the worst in society. What's the alternative to that thinking?
Well, if they don't do anything about it, definitely governance is going to, keep going downwards, a downward turn. But imagine where people are speaking out, rights are upheld, people are getting, the legal service and justice that they, deserve. We have a better society, improved governance, people getting to actually do what they want to do. Service delivery gets to the people at the grassroots. So that's like a better society for all.
Thank you very much, Flora. On that note, we have to wrap up the conversation right now. I'm speaking with Flora Asieri, Senior Program Officer for Governance at Stakeholder Democracy Network, on the matter of the status of the civic space here in Rivers State. Flora, many thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Commercial break right now. The news update is up at 5 p.m. Discussions continue afterwards. What should remember up to these days? The ban on dropping refuse on the medians has it been implemented in your neighborhood? When I return, please stay with us. you.